Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Mormon Atheist. I got a great show for you guys tonight. We have like and subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel already. Like the video. Apostate congregation, I really appreciate you guys returning to the videos and watching them multiple times. There's a ton of information in all of these videos, so I urge you to go back and watch them. At the end of this video, I'm going to drop a couple of really good bombshells, so stay tuned all the way to the end. So tonight's topic is we're going to be reevaluating Mormon history, okay? There's a huge hole that I've noticed. If you watch all of my videos, you'll see the progression of how these events and stuff have taken place. There's a huge hole in Mormon history. None of the dates line up. None of the names line up. It's a giant gap. So I think that just wipe the slate clean and let's start from the beginning, right? So I went back to through my journeys of reading articles of the era, the 1920s, the 1820s, from the 1700s all the way up until Joseph Smith's death. That's kind of my area of focus. And tonight we're going to be talking about a book that I came across during these readings that I've found. So the name of this book is called New America, and it's by William Hepworth Dixon, and it came out in 1867. So the thing about this book is he spent in 1866, he spent a year with Brigham Young in Salt Lake. So the basis of this book is William Dixon's trek across the New America. You got to remember, this is the frontier, right? So this is the New America. Dixon starts out with, he gets his wagons ready, he gets everything, all, and he's telling you the story as he's getting the stuff going, right? And then off he goes. This book covers race, it covers women, it covers Indians, politics, all mixed throughout the entire book. It's really a fascinating read. It's really incredible to read and see the history of Salt Lake when he comes over the mountain and he describes how Salt Lake is all situated and how it's a very, very telling early Americana book, right? And especially if you're interested in Salt Lake history. This is this book came out in 1867, okay? All right, and we'll get into the significance of that date here in a minute. So, there's really some of the things that I really like about the book is the warnings. There's some really interesting political warnings that he talks about in 1867 that we're literally still talking about today. Race, women's rights. He literally says in the book, what's the difference between a slave and a woman? They both have no rights. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, apostate congregation. I'm telling you, this book is fascinating book. 200 years later, and we're still dealing with this stuff. The same arguments that they're talking about. It's crazy. So these books are a great insight to history. This book is all about he's going to visit the Mormons, right? In 1866, he's spending a year with them, right? With Brigham Young. And guess what, apostate congregation? It is not called, well, I take that back. It is called Salt Lake, but it is commonly referred to as the New Jerusalem. Okay, everybody in the Salt Lake Valley. He describes Colville coming through, Bitter Creek. He describes everything, right? And it's really interesting. But the entire time, this area, Utah, it's not actually called Utah yet. They call it the New Jerusalem. Pretty interesting stuff. So I'm going to actually be reading some direct quotes right out of the book. From Brigham Young. So the way that it takes place once he gets there, he has direct conversations with Brigham Young, and Brigham Young is telling him stuff about. He's asking questions about Joseph Smith, which we'll get into those here in a little while, and those are fascinating because I'm telling you right now, the Mormon history that we know today is not what they were telling people in 1867. And I have several articles now. I've collected about 5 or 6 different articles, and I'm going to tell you about 4 of them today that are just fascinating when it comes to Joseph Smith. And I'm saving that to the end, so you got to wait till the end for that. Okay, so Dixon, the author of the book New America, he starts out talking about Brigham Young. So full disclosure, my area of interest is not the Brigham Young era. Okay, I am not interested in the Brigham Young era. I'm interested in from 1700s to Joseph Smith's death. But the caveat is the departure to Salt Lake. Why did that departure take place? That's one of my interests as well, because that has a direct the Joseph Smith story has a direct effect on why they left. It's not what we've been told. I promise you. If once you read these stories and read these books, I would imagine that you would come to the same conclusion, because it's very, very striking. So the Brigham Young era, I'm not even going to pretend to know about. I do know the stories, but that's not my area of interest. Okay, so this is fascinating. It's really fascinating stuff. Remember that we're dealing with direct quotes from the major players here: John Taylor, Orson Pratt, Parley Pratt, Porter Rockwell, Heber C. Kimball, what's the other? Wells, David Wells. I'll be talking about Wells here in a minute, okay? But so these are the major players, right? That formulate the trek to Salt Lake, right? Okay, so the significance about Dixon is he's a traveler and a writer. He literally has no stake in the game. He's not anti-Mormon. He's not pro-Mormon. He's writing about the new America, the West, right? The prairies, all this stuff, right? That's what he's writing about. And this book is talking about how he talks about his trek to Salt Lake. When he gets to Salt Lake, he talks about all of the stuff, New Jerusalem. He talks about Brigham Young. He talks to all these people, and it's really fascinating. He literally has no stake in the game. So it's literally an outsider's look into Mormonism in 1867. I repeat to you, this is not anti-Mormon literature here, okay? He's literally just trekking around. If you've ever read Diodorus or Herodotus, it's the same exact thing. He's literally just trekking around, logging people and what they're doing. He talks about the Indians, and it's really interesting stuff, right? So, but let's be clear though, he does not buy into the Mormon story. He makes that very clear. He does not buy into the Mormon story. But what he does, because he knows exactly where the foundations of Mormonism comes from, which he actually describes in the book. There's a family of seers, right? We'll get into that later on. And it's not the Smiths. It is not the Smiths. Okay. So he describes this stuff in great detail. He goes into detail about all of this stuff. So since Dixon starts with Young, this book is mostly about Young. Okay. Young and the author talk about Smith, 1866. This is church history that I think has never been told. I've never heard most of the stories in here. I have heard, but a lot of them I've literally never heard. Or if I've heard them, these stories in these books I'm going to tell you about they explain Mormon history in an entirely different light. Okay. So it's really fascinating stuff. All right. So it's kind of never before heard stuff right here. Just a few things. Right at the very beginning of the book, he talks about how Brigham Young passes a law to sell the Indian children, boys and girls. These are the Ute and the Snake Indians. Okay. I've literally never heard of the Snake Indians before. I've lived in the Southwest my entire life, and I've never heard of the Snake Indians, but he refers to the Snake Indians quite often. He also says that polygamy, here's something that'll really freak a lot of you out. Polygamy comes from the Indian tribes because the Indian tribes practiced polygamy and they thought that it was a good idea. And then all of a sudden, Brigham Young shows up with a new revelation dated back to 1928 or 1828, saying Joseph Smith had a revelation. Here it is, polygamy. Crazy stuff, right? This is in the book. It's in the book. So, all right. So then, he kind of comes out swinging, but like, there's no hate. It's all truth. He's not hating on anybody. He does give his opinions, but that's not what the book is not about his opinions. The book is about what he sees and what he is going on. Right. And for those of you that are just joining, the name of this book is called New America by William Hepworth Dixon. And it came out in 1867. And it's a really good early insight to Mormon history. If you're interested in Mormon history, Mormon history is not what you've been told. Okay, so he says repeatedly throughout the book that Young is the founder of the church, and he calls it the new church. Young is the founder of the new church because there was an old church, and he describes it in the book, this old church and where it came from and who started it and all of this kind of stuff. And Brigham Young kind of took it over, and like it tells you the entire story, right? We'll get into that later, though. Dixon describes Young. So when they're coming into the Salt Lake Valley, he describes how Young is coming over the hill to the New Jerusalem, okay? And Brigham Young has a vision coming over the hill. We all know the story. If you've ever been to Utah, this is the place monument, right? This is where they're talking about. He comes over the hill and he says it's the New Jerusalem, okay? And he has a vision, Brigham Young does, and he sees an angel, and the angel points to the spot where the new temple should be built. Okay, this is a direct quote from Brigham Young. This is Brigham Young telling the author of the book this story, okay? This is not opinion. This is a direct quote from Brigham Young, okay? And he says where the temple should be built, okay? And it was called the New Jerusalem. But here's the twist, though. He never built the temple first. It wasn't that important to him. He built a theater first. The theater was the first thing that he built. And the theater was very important to him because he has 3 daughters that are in the theater. The book names the daughters. They're actresses. It's very important for them to be actresses, professional. Dixon, the author of the book, goes through and describes one of Brigham Young's wife's, Amelia. Okay. So full disclosure, I do not know Brigham Young history very well. So I don't know if Amelia is even one of the known wives of Brigham Young. Okay. I don't know. I don't know the history of Brigham Young. So these stories that I'm telling you about Brigham Young here, I think are fascinating because it plays into the Joseph Smith story. And the Joseph Smith story is what I'm interested in. So So that's why I'm bringing you Brigham Young information right now. So one thing that I thought was really fascinating, considering the history of Joseph Smith, right? Okay, during this part of the book, when they're talking about the theater and how they built the theater, and Brigham Young is kind of giving them a walk around, telling them, everything. The play that they're going to be watching that night is called My Husband's Ghost. Now, apostate congregation, I know that you know the story of Joseph Smith. Now, that's kind of a creepy story, right? My husband's ghost. I just thought that was kind of funny. I don't know. All right. Anyways, my sense of humor is not what this show is about. Okay, so keep it on going on here. So Dixon goes on to explain about an Elder Clausen. Okay. So the significance of Elder Clausen is Brigham Young's agent. He doesn't really say what that means, though, but he's his agent, though. Okay. And Elder Clausen marries one of Brigham Young's daughters, Alice. Okay. So Dixon, the author, he has some one-on-one time with Alice, and he talks about how they go out for, I believe it was a cup of tea or something like that. And they go get a cup of tea, and he talks to her for a little while. And he asks her, he says, I've noticed that you guys don't refer to your husbands by their names. And she says, no, we call them by their baptismal names, which is Hiram. Okay. The significance about this, she says, Hiram, and they refer to them as Mr. or Mr. Smith. That's what they call their husbands, Hiram or Mr. or Mrs. Smith. Okay. So that's kind of interesting, because if you watch my past videos, I say that I don't believe that Joseph Smith is a real person. So that also means that Hiram is not a real person. But the caveat is there are guys, there are people, and we will explain that. And they also go over it in the book as well. So you will be so surprised if you read this book. I'm just telling you that much right now. So, yeah. So like I said, I don't want to get hung up on Brigham Young, but these are direct quotes from Brigham Young explaining the Joseph Smith story in 1867. Now, you tell me how different this story is compared to the one that you've been told. Okay, so we're not going to get into it yet, but we're going to get there. So, okay, so Dixon, so when they start in chapter 19 of the book, they start out telling the Joseph Smith story. Okay, so right off the bat, Dixon says, and this is a direct quote I'm going to read to you right now, says, this is Dixon, okay? Nothing is more easily than a laugh than these votaries. Their prophet, Joe Smith, and the story of his gold plates, the Urim and Thummim, which he describes as spectacles, the Egyptian mummy, the Spalding manuscript novel, the Sword of Laban, angelic visitors, the Mormon bank, paper money, and the spiritual wife, may so be told by a man of comic vein as to excite shouts of laughter in a Gentile room. That's stunning. That is stunning, right? That's stunning. That's what he says right off the get-go. Okay, so then Brigham Young, in a conversation later on in the book, they're talking about Joseph Smith, and this is what Young says. Okay, this is a direct quote from Young. They're talking about Joseph Smith. He says, "No man is popular until he has been abused. No man is thought a saint until he has been culminated. No man is ranked among the prophets until he has been stoned to death. Persecution, in quotations, says Young. End quote. That's a direct quote from Brigham Young. Then Brigham Young goes on to say, 39 times Joseph was cited into the courts of law. 39 times, guys. How many times have you been told? Okay, this is direct quotes from Brigham Young in 1867. It's actually 1866 because the book comes out in 67. Okay, he talks about Joe's craft. Now, remember, apostate congregation, if you have watched any of my previous videos, you will know that that all of the little parchment papers and all that stuff is all Solomonic magic, right? You all know that. You've all looked it up. You've all seen it. You've all compared it. Apostate congregation, I know that you are smart. Okay, so you know this stuff. Okay, so he talks about Joe's craft. Joe's craft is Solomonic magic. Okay, so he says, and again, keep in mind, this is Brigham Young talking, okay? He also says, other saints were declaring Joe was stealing from the common till. Rigdon was part of the palming off of Spalding's romance as a translation from the golden plates. I'm sorry, this is not Brigham Young speaking. This is Dixon speaking, okay? This is Dixon speaking after talking to Brigham Young, okay? Okay, so he says, there's also other saints declaring Joe was stealing from the common till. He talks about how Rigdon was part of the palming off of Spalding's romance as a translation from the golden plates. Spalding quitted and exposed him. That's a direct quote from Brigham Young, okay? That's Brigham Young exposed him, or Solomon Spalding exposed. I'm sorry, I'm getting messed up with names now. Solomon Spalding exposed him. Okay, so is that part of the story that you've heard? Solomon Spalding exposed Joseph Smith as a fraud? I mean, he goes on and describes this stuff, right? He continues he says, a gang of ruffians, okay, now this is Young again, okay? A gang of ruffians taking the law into their own hands broke into the prison at Carthage and shot him down like a dog. This enraged the other saints. All Smith's faults were forgotten. All the remembrance of his craft, his greed, his ignorance, his ambition was all buried in a secret grave. That's powerful, guys, right? I mean, that's powerful. Okay, then Dixon goes on to say, this story is as old as time. Smith living in Nauvoo, squabbling with his apostles about debts and dues, wrangling with his wife Emma about spiritual wives, subject to constant accusations of theft and drunkardness, but his assassination in the jail at Carthage raised the alleged debtor and the drunkard, this alleged thief and fornicator, into the ranks of a saint. So I want to be clear when he says alleged. He's saying alleged because he does not believe the Joseph Smith story, right? So he is all of these things are alleged, and we'll get into that later. Okay, we'll get into that later. Okay, so now he goes on. Brigham Young. He starts describing Brigham Young now. He says, Brigham Young is a man of low birth. They had to leave. They're talking about Missouri, because Young's troubles at Mississippi had become untenable, and they went west. Is that the story you were told? You see how Mormon history is so extremely convoluted and so just... I mean, if you go onto the church's websites, their own websites, if you look at minor details of some of these characters, their own stories don't even match up. Literally, you have to be looking for this stuff. But if you read, go to, the Joseph Smith papers, go to LDS.org, go to any one of these sites, okay, and read the stories on Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery. You pick them, read them, and then go to one of the other sites and read the exact same story. They're different. They're all different. Every one of them are different. None of them are the same. So why is that? Why is that? If your story is so solid and set in stone, why on your own websites do you have different stories of these people? I don't know, apostate congregation. So again, this book is called New America by William Hepworth Dixon. It came out in 1867. He spent a year with Brigham Young in Salt Lake City. It was called the New Jerusalem back then. And he tells the story about, how polygamy comes from Indian tribes and all this stuff. So he also says in the book, remember, this is 1866. He says in the book, 36 years ago, that would have been 1830. 36 years ago, there were 6 Mormons in America. That's 1830. At first, they were a Pacific race. What? A Pacific race? Is that anything you've ever heard? The Mormons came from the Pacific Islands? Now, apostate congregation, I want you to understand. He writes this more than one time in this book. So this is not a one-off right here. This is the Mormon story. This is Brigham Young. He's in Salt Lake City talking to Brigham Young, John Taylor, Miss Snow, the gang. He's talking to the gang, the crew, okay, Joko. He's talking to them, right? And the Mormons are Pacific Islanders? Get out of town. I'm not making this up, folks. It's in the book. It's in the book. Okay. So then he goes on to say, he explains how they didn't really have much food and all this kind of stuff. So they gathered guns and swords. And they became a formidable force in Iowa and Illinois from the Pacific Islands. No joke. They sent soldiers to the Mexican War. Did you know that? Mormons went to the Mexican War? I didn't know that. But this is, okay, guys, you can think I'm crazy all you want to, but I literally am not making any of this up. I have about 6 different references now that say similar stories to this. Okay, that literally have nothing to do with Mormonism. They're not pro or they're not anti. They're just telling you a story. Okay, so you have to wonder. You have to wonder, apostate congregation. By the way, like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Like and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so then he goes on and he says, so they sent soldiers to the Mexican War, and they have been on drill ever since, he says. Mormons are not Christians. No church can handle them in their current state of mind, he says. They're fanatics, man. He literally tells, they're fanatics, dude. Okay, they're not so. Often said, Young has a new Bible. Young says that's not true. In 1866, apostate congregation, Young says there's no new Bible. But they do talk about the Book of Mormon. But there is no new Bible. They do not show at any time, they do not produce the Book of Mormon to William Dixon. They actually describe, William Dixon actually describes where he goes into a drugstore and he asks for the Book of Commandments. Well, the clerk hands him the King James Version of the Holy Bible instead. And he says, this is the only book that we believe in. So there is no Book of Mormon yet. In 1866, there's no Book of Mormon. At no point in time does any one of these articles that I'm going to show you today produce a Book of Mormon. They talk about a Book of Mormon, They say that they're reading the Book of Commandments, which we know today as the Doctrine and Covenants, right? But there's no Book of Mormon. This is an 1866 apostate congregation. There's no Book of Mormon. I have to wonder. I have to wonder. I ask you, apostate congregation, these questions. You watch any of my videos, and I put out there, I welcome information. The church's story does not match up to outside sources at all. At all. You can look it up yourself. You can do your own homework. You can. In my other videos, I talk about this. Oliver Cowdery, the guy that took that picture of Oliver Cowdery, James Ball, I think is his name. If you go on Wikipedia and look underneath the picture, it says James Ball. At no point in history can I place those two people together in order to take that photo. And if you look at James Ball and you read what kind of photo that is, that's like you're going to get some really expensive glamour shots done in today's world, right? So that you think of the logistics of going just to get a photo from where James Ball lives, and James Ball is very successful. He is not just going to uproot and go take one photo. You got to think of the wagon trains, all this kind of stuff, right? The logistics, the money. It's going to be very expensive to take one photo of Oliver Cowdery, and they're not even together. I can, at no place in time can I put those two people together in order to take that photo. And that is just based on the Wikipedia information. That's just Wikipedia. The church's story and Wikipedia. That's not even diving deep into it yet. I haven't even begun to dive into that yet. But just on Wikipedia, you can't place those two people together at all. Okay, back to this. So, the King James Version, so he asked him for a Bible. He gives him a King James Bible with strong language. This is strong language. He believes only in the King James Version of the Bible. That's it, strong language. Okay, the Book of Mormon, but there is none. You go to a bookstore and they give you a Bible. That's what I was just saying earlier, right? And it's not actually called the Book of Mormon. It's called the Book of Commandments. Okay, so now we get down the line into actual chapter 19. Okay, and it starts out, the name of the chapter is called Two Seers. Okay, hang on one second. So the name of the chapter is called Two Seers. So right off the bat, he starts out, he describes how awful seers are, dregs of great cities, he says, the ooze of the riverbanks. And he goes on. He doesn't stop there. Okay. Then he goes on to describe Joseph Smith. He says, Joseph Smith was a poor lad. He was born in Sharon, Windsor County, Vermont, which we know that. The son of unlettered parents. Now, what that means is there's no documentation of his parents. So in 1866, this guy's telling you that Joseph Smith, the son of undocumented parents, well, who was Joseph and Lucy? We'll get into that later. Okay. Joseph Smith is not a real person, guys. Well, I take that back. He is a real person, but the character that we know is not a real person. Okay. Okay. So, so then he goes on to say, Joseph would watch Elder Frederick, the Shaker preacher at Mount Lebanon. He was an untaught boy. In his body trances, okay, body trances, the craft, remember, in his body trances, he would have angelic visions. He had spoken to God face to face. He had been chosen to plant a new church on earth, a Church of America, a new canon. This is significant right here, guys, because when Dixon is in Salt Lake, he refers to the LDS Church as the Church of America. He does never once call it the Mormon Church or the LDS Church, the Latter-day Saint Church, the Temple of the LDS, never once. Brigham Young even refers to it as the Church of America, the new Church of America. Have you ever been told that? I've never been told that, but he says it several times. Okay, so he sees God face to face. Remember the craft, everybody. Psalmonic magic. Okay. So now he has a new Church of America, a new canon. Sound familiar, guys? Okay, chosen from the beginnings of time to the home of a new creed and the seat of a new empire. The saints toiled in the Pacific vineyard. There's another Pacific Island reference. He literally references the Pacific Islands through the whole book, guys. It's where the saints came from. Okay, so now we're close to the end. Thank you for sticking with me. Now I'm going to drop some bombshells, but first, no, we'll just get into it. Okay, so then we get into the twist. We're still in chapter 19, by the way. There's literally so much information you could do an entire year's worth of podcasts just on one page, guys. Literally one page, and there's 500 pages in this book, man. It's a great, phenomenal read. It's a great read. Okay. The author explains in great detail the founding of the church. The prophecies of the new church are of prophetess Eliza Farnham of Staten Island, New York. Her husband, Joseph Smith, in 1842, had a vision of plurality. At no point in time does any of the literature that I'm going to mention to you tonight ever mention Oliver Cowdery or Martin Harris. Never once. Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris do not exist. They don't exist. They're characters. They're characters to fulfill the story. Okay? So I'm in future episodes, I'm going to get into Eliza Farnham and her husband, Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith dies, and she buries him. And she does not like the prophecy of plural marriage. So she separates and goes and forms a new church. And Brigham Young and Orson Pratt and John Taylor aren't having it. They don't want no part of it. So they separate. And this is when Young goes west. Who is Eliza Farnham? Have any of you ever heard of Eliza Farnham? I've never heard of Eliza Farnham before. That's not any of Joseph Smith's wives. So who is she? And where is Emma at? What happened to Emma? You see what I'm saying, apostate congregation? These stories don't add up. This is in 1867, you guys. 1866 is when Dixon is in Salt Lake talking to Brigham Young about this. Okay, so I want to give you some literature. Okay, I'm going to tell you about a couple of authors. One of them, his name is Solomon Southwick. Solomon Southwick is very important when it comes to William Morgan and Masonry. Okay, Solomon Southwick writes about the trials of William Morgan in 1826, and in his writings, guess who's at the trial? Orson Pratt, David Wells, all of these guys are there. They're all there and so this is in the writings of Solomon Southwick. He has several. Now Solomon Southwick is referred to as an anti-Mason, So if you look him up, you will have to look up the anti-Mason Solomon Southwick. I also want to tell you about Fraser Magazine. Okay, Fraser Magazine is a magazine that is pretty well known in the Mormon world. This is reported as anti-Mormon literature. Okay, so Fraser Magazine, if you actually read that, which I've seen so many podcasts on Fraser Magazine, but nobody ever talks about what's actually in that book. Fraser Magazine is a bombshell. You got to read that book. The very first paragraph, man. Apostate Congregation, the very first paragraph. He tells you that nobody can describe the particulars of Joseph Smith. Nobody. Everybody knows the story, but nobody can describe what he looks like, what his character's like, what kind of jokes he told, the way his smile, and he goes on to describe it. This book does the same thing. This book does the same thing, except he uses a different word. He doesn't use particulars. He uses the word lineaments. Nobody can describe, or I'm sorry, lineament. That's what he says. Nobody can describe the lineaments of Joseph Smith. Well, I didn't know what that word meant, so I had to look it up. So that word means character. Nobody can describe the character of Joseph Smith. Okay, that's two direct quotes from the major players: Brigham Young, John Taylor, Orson Welles, Orson Pratt, Orson Hyde. These guys, Miss Snow. In Fraser Magazine, it's Miss Snow, Orson Hyde, and Orson Pratt and John Taylor that he's having a conversation with, and he can't describe them. They can't describe Joseph Smith. Okay? So, John Hanson Beadle. This is another guy that I want you guys to look up, Apostate Congregation. John Hanson Beadle is a guy, he's another author that is going through he wants to go see the Mormons. So he goes with them to write about the history of the journey, right? He is not LDS. I want to repeat that. He is not LDS. He is not LDS. He is not LDS. But you can actually look this guy up on the LDS website, and it says that he is an LDS and he later apostatized. He was never a member, Apostate Congregation. He was an author that was literally doing writing a book. And you can look him up and you can read his book. You can read his book. I mean, it's insane. Okay. Back to Fraser Magazine. Fraser Magazine, the article that I wanted to point out in that magazine is called The Original Prophet. So if you read that article, it goes through and describes the Mormon experience, the Joseph Smith story. And that article is scathing. I got to tell you, that article is scathing. Bad. But, I mean, he does compliment Mormons a lot in both of these books. I want to say that very clearly to all of you. In all of these books, Mormonism is complimented a lot. It's the way that the people are being toiled. It's the way that the people are being lied to. It's the way that the people are being manipulated. That's what all of these authors have issue with. It's not the Mormon religion. It's the way that it's the story. Its very foundations beginning are a lie. And everybody knows it, and everybody's calling them out, and everybody's saying all this stuff. There is so much literature on this stuff, you guys. All you have to do is look. You just got to look it up. Don't look at church sources. Go outside and get the sources. And when you read New America, he talks about other newspapers. Look up those newspapers. Read those articles. In Solomon Southwick, he talks about other books. Look up those books and read those books. Okay? James McPherson, we're going to talk about him. James McPherson, he has a manuscript It's called the Oneida manuscript. The significance of that is he lived in the 1700s, and lo and behold, his story is exactly the same story as Joseph Smith's. He found a bunch of ancient writings, and he turned them into, they're called the Oneida poems. You can look them up. They're the Oneida poems. And it's said that he translated those from an ancient religion, an ancient language. Well, everybody called him out right away. Nobody believed him, right? Fascinating story, James McPherson. They're called the McPherson manuscripts, is what they're called. Okay, now the significance of all these writers. This is my last page, everybody, and we're going to be done after this. So let me make sure I got all the books here. So one of the importance of with James McPherson is I want to say that the writing is not what you're looking at if you look him up. It's how he translated the writings. It's his story. That's what's important, is his story. His story is the same as Joseph Smith's story. He was persecuted. He was, it's in different ways, but the underlying, the persecution, the martyrdom, all of that stuff, right? Okay. And he was Scottish too. That's significance because of the Scottish rites, Masons that have to do with the William Morgan case, right? William Morgan is a 200-year unsolved mystery. Let's solve it, apostate congregation. I think the Mormons had something to do with that, because in that book, Solomon Southwick's book, he literally says William Morgan was going to release the information about the Masonic. The Church of Masonry is what he calls it. It's a direct line. He literally calls it the Church of Masonry, and they killed him for it. Okay, anyways, enough about William Morgan. He is my hero. So the significance of all these writers are they're all independent. They're all credible eyewitness accounts of the time periods, and people they are talking to are the actual source. So he's literally talking to Brigham Young. He's talking to Miss Alice. He's talking to Miss Amelia. He's talking to these people, right? And he writes it down. No one can describe Joseph Smith. They all know the story, but no one ever meets him. Nobody has ever met Joseph Smith. Even in the book, nobody has ever actually physically met Joseph Smith. Nobody. This is the founder of the religion, people. Apostate congregation. Do you understand that? This is the founder of the religion. And I have several articles now and literal books of the time period where these people go there and nobody can describe the particulars of Joseph Smith. Nobody. Okay. So in Southwick, Beadle, Dixon, they all say in some form or fashion, not even those closest to him can describe his character. That's pretty profound, congregation. You understand? So that's the end of my presentation here. I do want to emphasize, though, that if you are interested in actually reading these stories and reading Americana history, this book in particular, A New America, you have to keep in mind this book was written in 1866, people. The language is very different. Okay. The N word is very prevalent. He literally says, what is the difference between an N word and a woman? Neither one of them have any rights. No joke. I'm not kidding you. So it's a very powerful book, and there's a lot of warnings in this book. Towards the end of the book, there's a couple of chapters that made me feel like dirt. I felt this bit. because he's literally telling you, this is in 1866. He's telling you about, if you people see in the future, if you live long enough, if this work lasts this long, right, you will see what this stuff, you will heed the warnings, all these kinds of things. It makes the hair on my arms stand up. It's insane. It's so profound, so profound. And I really highly recommend reading this book. I'm going to be doing more podcasts on this book. I'm not going to do them consecutively because I get kind of bored with the stuff. So I like to go to the magic. I like to, the Solomonic magic. I like to go to William Morgan and the Masonry. I like to go to the history part of it. I like to do profiles of these people because none of this stuff adds up. I want to be very clear about that. None of this stuff adds up. You can watch my other videos and you can see exactly what it is I'm talking about when I, and rewind this one and watch it again, and you'll see, and read the books, read the authors, look up Solomon Southwick, look up John Hanson Beadle, look up Fraser Magazine. The article is called The Original Prophet, and read this stuff. I'm telling you, all of you podcasters out there, in just these 3 books that I've told you, you will have months and months and months of podcasts, months, if not years, because there's so much information. I can't do it all. I can't do it all. There is so much information, everybody. Read this stuff. Read the Book of Mormon. Know what it is that you're arguing against in the first place, because most of you have never even read the Book of Mormon. So please, apostate congregation, I beg you, read that book so you know what it is that you're arguing. Because otherwise, if I give you these books and I tell you about these books and I've never read them, and then you read them, and then you come back and watch my video and you're like, this clown never even read them. I can tell just by the way he's talking. You'll see me and I'll see you, because I can know that you've never read the book just by the language that you're using, by how you're talking about it, how emphatic you are that you got to prove yourself right. Read this literature, people, and the name of this video is Reevaluating Mormon History. And just on what I have shared with, and let me tell you guys, this is not everything. There is literally so much that I'm not telling you in this. Other books, other articles, other things I've came across, colleges. This stuff goes deep, man. From 1700 to 1844 is my time frame. That's my area of interest. And there is a lot going on, a lot. And these stories that we have been told are not true. Okay. And this is coming from the church themselves. This is the own church website. Okay. All right, everybody. I'm just rambling on now. So I'm going to end the video. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Every Sunday I put out a new video. I try to make them at 6 p.m. Mountain time, but that doesn't always happen. So last week I didn't put out a video because I don't know how to put some of this stuff together, right? I still have a hard time with that. Like, how do I put it together in a comprehensive way to where people can understand this stuff, right? Because this is kind of a little more advanced, if you're going to be honest, right? We're not talking about garments or the head in the hat, or we're not talking about that stuff. Frankly, I'm not interested in that stuff. I could care less if you wear garments. If you want to wear garments, hey, whatever, man. More power to you. You're the one that has to suffer, not me. So that's my take on garments. And that's probably all I'll ever say about garments. So I'm not interested in the garment argument. I'm not interested in the polygamy argument. I'm not interested in a lot of things that have to do with Mormon history. But like I said, I am interested in Joseph Smith. And I want to know who that guy is. I want to know who wrote that book. I don't believe Joseph Smith wrote that book. I don't. According to this, in 1866, there wasn't the Book of Mormon anyways. There wasn't even a Book of Mormon in 1866. So what are we talking about in 1830? What happened in 1830? You see, that's what I want to know. I want to know that. What happened? Who wrote this? If this book did come out in 1830, I want to know. I want outside source information because people are writing about it. People are talking about it. This is not like some like dumb, stupid, podunk country boy can't survive. I mean, come on, apostate congregation, use your faculties. This story is not true. This story did not happen the way that it happened. It did happen, but not the way that the church tells us it happened. So let's figure out. Let's go in. Let's dive. Let's literally flood every article, everything that we can find, and let's figure out the real Mormon story. We are reevaluating Mormon history, everybody. And I thank you for joining the channel. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please watch my other videos. And I will see you guys next Sunday with more on this kind of stuff. Thank you.